Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and the past couple weeks have been pretty wild for us, so here's a peek at some of the projects I've been finishing up as the year comes to a close. So I said a short while back that I decided to shift my studio 16 inches to the left, and this is what happened. The mess of cords for my sewing machines and lighting is the only thing that I don't really like, but I added a new desk so that I can have two sewing machines set up at the same time, and I really love that. And this is the other side of this studio. It's kind of hard to get back here because I have everything set up for something I'm filming right now. But in this corner, this is where I have moved my 3D printer. And once I finish setting it up, I think it's going to work out really well because when it's here in the corner, it's better insulated, so I have more regular bed heating. And then on top of that, it actually can reach an outlet now, so I don't need to have a huge extension cord in my studio. And I would show you more of what the studio looks like right now, but I have a couple big projects out and visible that I kind of want to be surprises when they're done. But if you want to see like a more in-depth studio tour at some point, let me know and I could definitely film one. It was kind of a rough fall for us between losses in the family and dealing with some health issues, so I didn't finish as many projects as I wanted to, but I'm trying to remember that you can't do your best all the time or it wouldn't be called your best, right? One of the big things I tackled in the past few weeks was painting Little Rune's fantasy parts. I previously shared the hands and arms I sculpted and 3D printed for him. I wasn't able to get them perfectly smooth, but since the painting on his limbs would have some texture, I didn't think it would matter too much. I started off by sealing his Zoom legs with Vallejo matte varnish. This was the incident that led to me forgetting to put the cap back on and resulted in the whole bottle of varnish getting dried out and gooey. I'm going to order some more after the holidays, but I don't have any projects to work on until then anyway, so it's not urgent by any means. The green paint I picked for this project was also from Vallejo, and previously I've loved every single paint of theirs I've used, but this green was awful. It very well may be the worst paint I've ever used in my airbrush. The consistency and quality of paints always varies by pigment. Some are more durable or thinner, so you always have a few outliers that aren't as good, and this is definitely one of them. I had constant problems with clogging and dry tip with my brush, which led to the airbrush splattering a lot, and on top of that, the paint proved incredibly fragile. Even just brushing against it wrong resulted in it chipping or scraping off. As a result, I don't have high hopes of this paint job lasting very long, unlike the one I did for the adult version of this character, which was done with enamel spray paint and has thus far been incredibly durable. Because of how fragile the paint was, I abandoned my plans to use a vinyl stencil for the scales like I used for Rillin, and used the mesh method instead. The mesh made it hard to do things like the tiny hands, so I ended up leaving the palms without any texture at all. I ended up spending a lot of time touching up chips and scrapes while airbrushing, because even the soft mesh stockings I was using to stencil on the gouache scales was enough to scratch the green paint off. But it ended up being pretty pointless because one of the unfortunate discoveries I made was, since I didn't have any more matte varnish I could use, I used UV Cut Mr. Super Clear to seal the gouache scales. And it's a lot more potent than regular MSC, so it ended up completely obliterating all the scales I spent hours airbrushing onto the doll, which really broke my heart. I went ahead and painted his claws with Liquitex acrylics and finished the scaleless green parts with Minwax polyacrylic sealant to try and make them more durable, and I have some ideas for alternative scale methods I'll be trying in the future, but I decided that this was going to be one of those projects where I'd just have to say good enough for now. The good part about this kind of thing is the dolls can be redone indefinitely, so whenever I have time and energy to try again, I can. Around the time I finished airbrushing Little Rune's parts and got him put back together, A box I've been waiting on for 6 weeks finally arrived, which was paperbacks for the first book in my new epic fantasy series, which I started publishing in November. In a lot of ways, this was kind of a bittersweet experience for me, because when I started writing these books, I had every intention of making dolls of the characters, like I'd done with the Snake's Blood saga. Having dolls of Rune and Feral and the rest has been such a huge inspiration to me, and I kept telling myself that at the very least I'd make custom Monster High dolls of these characters so I could share some about this story too, because my books are what I'm most passionate about. But I just didn't have time, and the end result is that after working on this book series for about 5 years in the background while I was finishing Snake's Blood, all I've shared is a few glimpses at my early concept art, which I keep hanging in my studio. I still have a box of Monster High dolls I could maybe use to make doll versions of these characters. They won't be BJDs because I just don't have the space, but the more I think about it, the more I'm considering going even smaller due to space constraints and trying out Nendoroid dolls instead. I suppose it doesn't matter if I do it now or later, because I always have the chance to make dolls to go with these creations later on, but it was still a little weird to devote a lot of time to something and then sort of let it just slip out into the world with no fanfare. But it's done, and at least it is out there, and it's also nice to know that I've got enough future doll projects I'd like to do someday that it'll keep me going in this hobby for a very long time, even if the type of doll I customize may have to change sometimes to make sure it still fits in my house. I started writing the second book in the series in November, and by the time this video goes up, it'll probably be about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way done. It's been kind of weird to spend a lot of time working on something that doesn't involve the characters I've introduced and sort of built my creativity on this channel around. But even though I finished publishing the story I created for Rune and Feral, I have a lot more story ideas that happen in that world, and I get the feeling those characters will someday make an appearance again, even if it's just a cameo. The ones who are still alive anyway. If you couldn't tell, these are bookmarks. I get them printed and cut them by hand myself, and I really love how these bookmarks turned out. I hired an incredibly talented artist to do the cover art this time around, and I'm just completely in love with the work that she's done. And I guess that's really all I have to share this time, the little updates that didn't make it into everything else. Okay, so I already showed this desk earlier, but that hole is like really ugly, so I decided I'm just gonna like... Yeah, that is so much better. Fall comes late in some parts of Tennessee, and our trees just lost their leaves about a week ago, so this is what the season looks like for me, but we can switch to photos. Overall, I think the greatest gift I'll have gotten this year is having a wonderful hobby community that's been here to encourage me through a really difficult time. I appreciate all of you, and I'm grateful for all the opportunities I've been given to help people, and enjoy all the beautiful things you've created and shared with me. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next year. Bye.